How do we judge if Brexit has been a success? Look, I've said this constantly, and interestingly, and I stand to be educated as to why, but I rarely hear others make this point firmly enough. Even those who campaigned vigorously for Brexit don't often give the rather simple analysis when it comes to the big question, was leaving the EU the right thing to do? And my answer is this: it's too soon to tell. It's almost that simple. It's too soon to tell. I made this point constantly in the lead up to this, before we even went to the ballot box to vote. This is a move that will take, I would argue, at least 10 years to decide if Brexit has worked. And we're now only halfway through that. We are 5 years in. There are some clues, I would argue, that give us a scintilla of information about how well it may or may not be going. 0344 499 1000. And when you look, one of the great things about working here on Talk, which you don't get in many, if any, other places, is that we have an incredibly forensic and well-informed audience on these kind of issues. People often talk about everyone's an armchair general or an armchair prime minister. I think on stuff like this, certainly our audience on afternoons here at the home of common sense are always very good at doing their homework. You know, you've read up on this stuff, you've looked across all angles of the story and concluded X, Y and Z. And that's why this question, I think, is a pretty ripe one for our audience. Has it been a success? And what would you judge it by? I think there's a couple of it. I mean, the big areas are trade, immigration, travel, laws, and of course, money. And on the last point, it is worth, and I think this is, again, something I don't hear talked about often enough, frankly. I know it's not the only answer, but I think it's a pretty powerful one. We used to pay, do you remember what we used to pay to the EU on an annual basis? £18.3 billion. That's £18.3 billion. 352 million a week. Remember the bus. For fans of pedantry, by the way, it was a coach, but you take the point. Now, some of that we used to get back in terms of things like farming and development grants. But if you crunch the numbers, the net fiscal benefit to the UK from not paying in to the EU budget, from not paying in, is around about 9 billion a year. Now, I would say that's a good day at the office, wouldn't you? 9 billion quid a year. We are better off. I know it's not the full story, I get that. Financially, just based on the money we used to give, 18.3 billion. You think of all the countries, all 29 countries that were giving those kind of amounts of money. And you are forced, I think you'd be forced in any other world, when you to go, what do we get for that? So we get 18 billion, we get some of it back that went to agriculture and farming and areas that were in need of assistance and levelling up and all the rest of it. But, you know, broadly speaking, the EU kept most of that. What do they do with that stuff? Well, they did have two parliaments with about 20 trillion people working in them. There was a massive bureaucracy in that respect. So I would say if we're 9 billion better off not being in it, okay, about 9 billion. Now that on its own, I would say, is a good starting point. So all things are looking rather good at this point. In terms of taxation, there's all sorts of things, many things you might not have even clocked. We don't pay tax on sanitary ware in this country, but we do pay VAT on private schools. So no VAT on tampons, but VAT on private schools. Both of those decisions, by the way, were only possible as a result of leaving the EU. There is a sanitary tax of 5% in EU countries, and it is illegal to tax or put VAT on education, even if it's private. So both of those things happen as a result of not being in the EU. Make of that what you will. I want the wider question answered if we can. 0344 499 1000. Has Brexit been a success? We make our own laws. I think that's the obvious one that we would look at. And, you know, it's interesting because the supposed kind of catch-you-out answer or catch-you-out question that comes from the Remaining lobby is always, which laws have made this country better since leaving the EU? Which laws have made your life better since leaving the EU? And then you're sort of forced into this cul-de-sac of panic when you go, OK, hang on. Which law in particular is it that's made us better? And then, of course, the remainder goes, you see, there ain't one, is there? No, that isn't the point. It's not which laws, it's who makes the laws. That's the point of Brexit. It's who makes the laws, even if it's the same law, even if it amounts to the same thing. You know, if speeding is illegal over 70 miles an hour in Portugal and Spain and France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, all those doesn't matter. It's who makes the law. That's about democracy. And the most powerful argument for Brexit, to me, was always about democracy. And the last time I looked, there's nothing wrong with that